Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.
Well, hello and welcome to Engage for Success Radio. Today's show is number 586 in our weekly series, running now for over 10 years. I can't quite believe that we're still we've got to that point, but here we are. And today is an interesting topic, one that I'm really, it seems to be very appropriate for many of the conversations that we have with people about leadership and management. We're going to be looking at the topic of networked expertise versus narrow expertise. And in a moment, I'll introduce today's guests, who is going to be able to, first of all, I think, define those terms and then help us to explore this topic in a little bit more detail. But first of all, for those of you who are less familiar with who Engage for Success are and who I am, some introductions. So I'm Jo Moffat. I'm one of the regular hosts of Engage for Success Radio. I'm also founder of a specialist creative agency called Woodreed, where we help our clients create great places to work, high-performing cultures of engaged employees. So essentially everything to do with employee engagement, employee experience, and internal communication as well. Engage for Success is a not-for-profit movement. We are the UK's leading voice on the topic of employee engagement. We're raising awareness and running events through area networks around the country, topic and sector-specific thought and action groups, as well as online events as well. Developing research, most recently, some of you may have come to our event last week online where we gave you a little bit of a sort of preview to the headlines of our employee engagement survey and index 2025 report, which is publishing at the end of this month. But also we publish case studies, develop evidence, share evidence, and essentially shine a light on great practice in terms of engagement. So do visit us at engageforsuccess.org, where you can learn more and where you can also sign up for our weekly newsletter and keep ahead of that information about research and evidence and case studies, which is so important. So to today's show, as I say, number 586, and we are now streaming live on YouTube. That's a relatively recent addition, something that we've begun since the start of this year. Search Engage for Success Radio podcast if you want to find the link. And today's show and my conversations for the next half hour with our special guest, Ed Fidoe. Ed is founder of the London Interdisciplinary School. So welcome to the show, Ed.
Hi, Joe. Thanks very much. I'm pleased to be here.
It's good to have you with us, and I'm very much looking forward to you helping to take us through this topic and explain why it is so important, and also I'm interested to learn how you've got to do the role that you're currently doing, and how you not only are founder but also CEO of the London Interdisciplinary School, which I will from here on call LIS.
It's
Absolutely.
even harder to spell, but yes, London Interdisciplinary School. Well, I mean, actually, you say there about the sort of role of CEO and founder. I'm only CEO of this thing because I founded it. There's no way a new university would be hiring me to run it unless I was the one that started it. I mean, and the clue to networked expertise actually is partly in my background, which is a sort of, you can look at it a couple of different ways. You can either look at it as a kind of pretty random walk through a section of different kinds of jobs, or a journey where I was kind of building and working up knowledge in a wide range of areas, which can then be really helpful when you start to put them together. So I'll race you through it. I did mechanical engineering at university.
Yeah.
I then left university to run a theatre production company with a friend of mine for about 5 or 6 years. Then I became a McKinsey consultant, a management consultant for 4 years. Then left to start a school in East London. That was a 4 to 18 school when the free school movement was brought in by the coalition government in 2010. And I did that with two teachers, Peter Hyman and Ollie de Botton. And then started to get to the idea about what if you were to launch a university that wasn't focused on single discipline degrees or monodisciplinary degrees, but there was interdisciplinary. And then you start to get this idea of networked expertise versus the narrow expertise that we're so used to in our education system.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you to define those terms for us in a moment, but that's a useful introduction. So I'm guessing then, Ed, from what you've described there, you were probably, would it be fair to say you're quite a big fan of the whole baccalaureate approach to education rather than the, you know, 10 GCSEs, 3 A levels route?
Yeah, I mean, definitely a fan of more breadth for longer.
Uh-huh.
Or, or it may be the case, who knows, that some students do want to narrow down and that a bunch of students don't want to narrow down. But currently our system narrows everybody down.
Mm,
And I think that's wrong. The IB, the International Baccalaureate, is fantastic. I didn't study it, sadly, as a student. I did GCSEs and A-levels like most people do.
mm.
I think we need to see more of the IB. It's a really rigorous and challenging program. And we do get people applying to LAS with an IB background, which you might expect.
Right, yes, I'm sure. So tell us a little bit before we get into the specifics of today's topic. Tell us a little bit about LIS. How long's it been going? What sort of student numbers do you get? And are they by and large UK students, or do you draw people from around the world?
Well, we opened in 2021, so
Hmm.
we're pretty new still. For university terms, we're a little baby.
Yes.
And we're the first new university to open with our own degree awarding powers since Warwick University in the 1960s. So it's quite unusual. Now,
Yeah.
there've obviously been new universities in between, but they all had to be essentially babysat by another university for 7 or 8 years who could help validate their degrees. And this meant you didn't get much innovation in the sector. And then there was a change in the legislation, which meant that you could apply to get degree awarding powers right from the start. And I mean, it was hard. I mean, we had to kind of invest 2 years of time and £2 million of money and
Mm.
trying to attract students and academics all before we had these degree awarding powers. But that was the requirement that we had to meet. And it was important that we got degree awarding powers because we were going to offer a very different kind of degree. So the starting point was all these students are being forced to go off and do monodisciplinary degrees.
Mm.
And we're so used to that we just call them degrees. And what about if you did a degree that was organized in a very different way? So rather than being organized like a library in corridors, which is how we used to organize knowledge, what about if we think about it in a different way? Because, by the way, knowledge is not organized in libraries anymore. And it's not even organized in physical people, which is another way that it used to have to be organized, right? It was either organized in brains or on paper. Now, of course, it is everywhere. It is online. It is completely interconnected. It is, another way of putting it is that it's networked. So it's kind of
Right.
networked knowledge where knowledge is all interconnected, and you sort of if you're looking at a complex problem, for example, you won't just start in, let's say, the social sciences corridor using the Dewey Decimal System that libraries use.
Mm.
You won't just talk to a chemist if you're thinking about I don't know, like a pandemic problem or a climate change problem. You're going to have to think about a bunch of different disciplines. You're going to have to work with different kinds of experts. So where are the people going to study that are the people that are going to be able to have all of these different kinds of conversations? So we created a degree for that. So the undergrad, we do one undergraduate currently and one master's
Hmm.
degree currently. We've got 150 students in total, so we're still we're
Right.
but we've had our first sets of graduates, both masters and bachelors. They do a bachelor's of arts and sciences. It's a joint thing.
Hmm.
And they're going off to do some extraordinary jobs, actually, and including at the kinds of companies you might not expect to be willing to take a risk like this. They're getting great jobs at NHS, Goldman Sachs, KPMG, the Metropolitan Police, as well
Hmm.
as startups and sort of third sector organisations where you might expect them to get. I've sort of missed out the main bit that we're not organising it around corridors. We're organising it around big complex problems. So the students will be studying something like AI and ethics, and they'll be learning the data science. They'll be learning the law, the ethics
Hmm.
that you need to be able to think about a problem like that. And the next term they'll be looking at sustainability, and they'll be learning about material science and neuroscience, network science, and how to put those different disciplines together to tackle a complex problem.
Right. Fascinating. I have to say, I really had not come across LIS at all, and so that's really interesting to hear. Are you a physical university? I mean, you obviously you called LIS in London, but do you have is all the teaching delivered on the ground, or do you offer a sort of mixture of online and?
Yeah, I'm sitting here talking to you from our campus in Whitechapel in East London in Oldgate.
Uh-huh.
So there are some days when all the students are here, and there's other days where lots of them are being taught online too, because that's the sort of the nature of the modern world
Of
post-COVID.
course.
Very few universities teach absolutely everything face to face, and the students want that. They like some flexibility and not having to always come in.
Yeah.
But I'm a big believer actually that learning is a contact sport, and there's real benefits to it. We do a master's program which is entirely online, and that's for people that simply can't physically come here. We are almost all UK students, the ones that come here at the minute, but that's because we're new and sort of growing our reputation abroad. So it's UK universities, and the other thing is that we're really challenging the Russell Group. A lot of students are coming to us who are either spent a year at places like Bristol or St Andrews or even Oxford, didn't and thought, wait a minute, this is not what I wanted to do. I'm now going to go and take a risk at LAS, or they're turning down King's or LSE, and they're coming to us instead, which is really exciting because it's attracting a sort of, there's a self-selecting, very academically capable, intellectually curious group of people that we're attracting.
Who will be of interest and of value to potential employers postgraduate, won't they? Post-graduation.
Yeah, that's what we're saying.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so let's look at this topic specifically then, networked expertise versus narrow expertise, and thinking about it more from the perspective of organizations, whether those be public sector, private sector. Explain a little bit about the terms, and then what are the implications for one or the other when it comes to the world of work?
Yeah, okay. Well, so narrow expertise is perhaps self-explanatory, and it leads, in a sense, to this library idea of all of our knowledge being organised in libraries, and that's how we've organised our education system. But it's not just that. When you get into the world of work, you have experts. People are like, well, they work in accounts, or they work in IT, or they work in on the product, and that's their area of expertise. And we sort of, it makes us feel comfortable. We're used to that because that's how our education system has made us feel comfortable. It's rewarded us for narrow expertise, essentially. And by narrow, it's nothing necessarily bad about it. It's really that it's clustered. It's the same amount of expertise as someone else might have. It's just clustered in a quite concentrated area, and that's fine. But of course, none of us only have knowledge in one area. We all have a whole wide range of knowledge. We exist in the world, so we have lots of knowledge. We all had a reasonably broad-based education, so people have actually not narrow expertise. Everybody has some form of networked expertise, and you can sort of think about yourself. What would be your networked expertise if you think about it like a sort of one of those science models of all the molecules and atoms and sort of connected to each other, and what would that look like? You might have some bigger blobs of knowledge in certain areas around your kind of what you spend all your time at work doing, but you've also got an interest in, let's say, I don't know, astrology, or you've got an interest in sport or politics, and you can start to think about all these different things. Companies have a very, very limited view of what people's networked expertise is. They just don't really know. If you said to the company, do you know what everybody did for an undergrad? Even, do you know how many PhD students you've got here who've spent a long time looking at something? They wouldn't, in our experience, have a really good grasp of that. So step one to this is starting to try and unlock the networked expertise that already exists in your company, because I think that can be really powerful, particularly when companies are facing challenges now that they kind of, by definition, these new complex challenges haven't faced before. And if you think about the kinds of knowledge that suddenly was being valued in COVID, dusting off all that kind of GCSE science or some of the maths you hadn't done for so long, and thinking about the R rate and all that sort of stuff. This, it sometimes is going to be brought into the light that we need. We need to kind of lean on some of our other knowledge. And then the other part of this is to try and think about, as you move into being a manager of people, what is the knowledge that you need? Kind of, most people have sort of succeeded in their area of expertise, so they're an expert in something, in some, let's say, narrow expertise. But now they're managing a team of people, and that team has expertise in a bunch of different areas, not just that same narrow area. And the person might look at these people and go, "Wait a minute, I don't know what they're doing. I'm not an expert in this area." And then you've got a choice. You can either sort of stand back and say, well, they're the expert, I'll let them get on with it, and delegate and feel good about that. Or you can lean in and say, I'm going to learn more about their area, not as much as them, but I'm going to learn something, and I'm going to build out that networked expertise. And then I'm going to throw another jargon word at you. By doing that, you're building interactional expertise in something, which is the amount of expertise you need to interact with real experts, deep experts or narrow experts, right? Interactional expertise is a term that was introduced in the 70s and 80s, and we're kind of bringing this back and saying,
so I know enough to blag my way.
Well, so that's, It kind of where blagging isn't damaging, because there's another thing called the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where a little knowledge is dangerous, basically.
Correct.
So you've got
Yeah.
to watch out for that. But no, it's actually so that to some people you might be indistinguishable from the true experts. You remember that Channel 4 program Faking It? It's a little bit like
Mm-hmm.
you can talk to them, you understand their jokes,
Yeah.
but but you can manage them. You can ask them tough, challenging questions. It doesn't mean you can do their job, but you can be a better manager by leaning in.
No, I was being flippant, but yeah, I understand. I understand. But it's important, isn't it, being able to talk the language of the people that you lead and manage, as well as actually having a sufficient understanding of the challenges they face, the tasks and skills that they're
Yeah.
needing to apply,
Yeah.
and how you can help them as a leader and a manager, how you can actually help them navigate some of the challenges they're facing when you don't actually know the nuts and bolts of the job.
Yeah, I think that's it. And actually, in the knowledge economy, lots of us have jobs where we wouldn't necessarily consider ourselves to be experts in something, and then we'll sort of feel a bit sheepish, like, "Oh, what am I an expert in? I'm just a generalist." And a generalist can be a pejorative, a negative term for people. They sort of think generalist means jack of all trades, master of none type thing. Whereas actually, what we're saying here is that in the knowledge economy, a lot of us have interactional expertise in multiple different areas, and being able to combine those and move between them is of huge value. It's really important to be able to do that. There's questions about whether in an AI world that's more important or less important, and we don't really know, but it's definitely been important. And now to name it and say, look, what can I build my interaction expertise in as a generalist is I think a really useful exercise.
Absolutely. We were talking just before we went on air about the challenges that certainly a lot of the time at Engage for Success and events and conversations that I have with people about the challenges, the shortcomings of management, particularly in the UK, that people are often promoted into being a people manager or a team leader or a line manager simply because they're good at the tasks that they have done. They're the best salesperson, the best accounts person, best coder. So yes, let's promote you to running a team of coders or running a team of salespeople, and that's almost organisations straitjacketing people down that narrow expertise, isn't it? When in fact it might be far better to have somebody appointed to lead that team because they've got the people skills, the emotional intelligence skills, and the innate communication skills. But they haven't got the narrow expertise. But if they can hone their networked expertise, or their, as you've described it, the interactional expertise, then you're kind of getting the best of both worlds, aren't you, as an employer?
I think that's right. I mean, I think it's a tricky one. It's always a sort of trade-off, I think, when you're promoting people to be managers. I mean, you can say, well, look, let's say in the NHS, you've got these fantastic surgeons. Well, do you really want the world's best heart surgeon managing 5 other heart surgeons that aren't as good, or do you want them doing the surgery? But then you end up with people, sort of professional managers who are really good at managing. But then there's a sort of there can be a respect issue, and we've seen this in the NHS. There's pros and cons to taking that approach, or in tech companies, often you want your best coder to carry on coding, and you can just pay them more, but you don't want them managing 10 other not quite as good coders.
Yes,
But then you get the problem where coders don't respect their managers because they're like, well, I'm a better coder than you. And so
I know
it's a
better.
trade. So it's a trade-off. But you see, if we have this language of, well, yeah, they're not as good a trader, they're not as good a coder as you, or they're not as good a heart surgeon as you, but they have expertise in a broader range of areas than you do, and that is useful in their role, and therefore they're a better manager than you. And so, I think we don't have enough terms, in my view, of talking about how much people know, how good they are at things, and we definitely don't have terms for talking about people's intellectual range. We talk about generalist. It's a bit of a lame term. We don't talk about intellectual range and breadth in really as many ways as we do about lots of other things. And I think it's a sort of quality that's underrated.
Okay, so I agree. I absolutely agree. I think it's we're not very good sometimes at exploring these slightly more complex topics, are we? We like nice simple solutions in simple
Yeah.
boxes. So why does it become hard for people to manage somebody whose work they don't fully understand, or the tasks of that particular role? Can they? Is it simply that they don't earn the respect of the people they're trying to lead or manage, or is it? Do they try and almost bluff their way and fail to establish credibility? What are the challenges of trying to manage someone who you don't really understand the work they're doing?
Well, I think so. I think there's sort of two types of interaction expertise. One is the understanding the role of the person that you're managing, right? We talked a bit about, and there's another one which is understanding the world out there, which is becoming way harder to understand, and the big shifts that are happening in the world that affect how your business has to respond. And I think if you take the first one, to your point, it's important because let's say, so I'm the chief exec at LIS, and I manage our chief marketing officer, and she has a bunch of set skills and experience in marketing. She's 30 years in the business, and I'm never going to be able to match her on that expertise. So but I ask myself the question, what do I need to know? And that's because otherwise I'm essentially abdicating my responsibility as a manager. Because if she says to me, everything's going tickety-boo, look at these numbers, and I don't even understand what the numbers are, which by the way, in the early days I didn't, because I'm suddenly looking at kind of, click-through rates on Instagram, and I don't know what good looks like and bad looks like because I had no experience of that at all.
Of course.
I don't know what the kind of cost per download of a brochure should be through YouTube advertising. I had no clue.
Yeah.
So you're abdicating. So the board would be well within their rights saying to me, you've sort of sailed this thing into a mountain or off a cliff because you weren't managing this person right. And I can say, well, I'm not, they're the CMO, so it's their responsibility. I just don't think that's good enough. I think, you've got to be asking yourself you've got to be able to challenge the results. You're going to be able to question their approaches. You've got to be able to help interrogate it. And it's not just people skills. There, of course, communication and people skills are important. But what use are people skills and communication if you haven't got the foggiest idea what they're doing? That you can deal with HR staff brilliantly and you can kind of try and keep them motivated. But I think it's you're doing it with kind of one hand tied behind your back, and then I think so. I think it's just riskier the more blind spots you have. And we're not about kind of knowing everything. That's impossible. But just reducing your blind spots is really important. And we talk about this idea of having dragonfly eyes, right? Dragonflies have thousands of eyes essentially that then integrate into one whole vision.
Yeah.
And you want to kind of try and you're trying to become you're build out your dragonflies, right? Have many, many, many different new perspectives because that just reduces your blind spots and you get fewer things wrong. And that's what's important. So yeah, that's why I think it's important for people to build up this interactional expertise. It's because that you become less wrong and you've got fewer blind spots.
Yeah. Okay. So if I want to become if I recognize that I've got narrow expertise and I want to build my networked expertise or become better at interactional expertise, how do I go about it? How do I know? How do I know what to prioritize?
This is something you're going to have to reflect on as a sort of leader or a manager or even just a member of a team. I don't have the answer to that, but I think the first thing is interesting exercise is to sit down and think about your networked expertise. What do you know? What are you good at? And then maybe have a little think about what you think, how good are you understanding what the rest of your team are really good at and what are their kind of what's their sort of hinterland of knowledge or kind of, the bits of them that you aren't presented every day. That's an interesting exercise to do. But I think the most important thing is to sort of sit down and go, right, what are the key concepts? You can ask your team this, your teammates. You can say to them, in your area, which is not my area, what are the 2 or 3 concepts really important? Like we call them threshold concepts, the things which once you understand them, you can never go back type thing, right? That are in your domain that I don't understand. And can you explain them to me? And, to give you an example of a threshold concept in biology would be evolution. Once you've heard about evolution, you've understood it, you can never go back. But you're not going to figure it out yourself, right? Unless you're
No.
Charles Darwin. So you're going to need to hear it. And then you're like, oh, okay, now I understand that. A lot of the rest of the world is going to start to make sense to me. So what's the threshold concept in marketing or in like in your area of research in this business or as an interviewer or as a journalist? What's the threshold concept that I need to understand? And a statistician might say, well, it's kind of understanding the difference between causation and correlation, right?
Yes.
And it's great. Okay, cool. Thank you. Now, have you got 2 more? And then I can start to maybe think about managing you in a more effective way. I'm oriented in your area. I understand it. I know my way around. I've got a map. So sitting down with the team and asking them that question, I think is good.
Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, you can actually you show you're quite honest about your level of ignorance, and I don't mean that in a pejorative manner.
No.
You're honest and transparent about what you don't know, and you ask your team to articulate the things that really matter,
Yep.
those threshold concepts,
Yep.
which also it presents you as an authentic person, an
Yep.
authentic leader who's open and honest and transparent, but it also gives them the opportunity to feel that they have got agency in this because they're actually being listened to and heard, and their knowledge is being given some weight and credence,
Yep.
credibility, isn't it? So it
Yep.
works both ways.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. And the other thing is, by the way, your team know you don't know. they
Yeah,
know, they know
sure.
they know just how ignorant you are about this stuff, and
Yeah.
if they're not telling it to you, they'll still be they'll be thinking about it themselves. So you won't be revealing some massive gap in your knowledge that they didn't know about. If
Mm,
they're an expert, they understand just what you know and don't know, because you. So you're right. It presents you as sort of being open, honest, and by the way, there'll be areas of your knowledge that they don't know either. Right? Of course, that's the case for everybody.
mm, mm, Interesting. So, imagining that I am a person listening to this interview now, this show now, and I'm in an HR leadership role, and there will be a number, many
Mm,
of those
mm,
listening.
mm,
It Listening to what you're saying, it seems to me it becomes patently obvious that it is in an organisation's interest to develop broader networked expertise amongst their
mm.
workforce in order to make their people managers and leaders better people managers and leaders, and to
Yeah.
prime that pump of future leadership quality. So, from an organisational perspective, is it a good thing for HR teams, people teams, to actually think about their people not as single, one-dimensional, skilled people who know this and know that, but actually look at their people in that more dragonfly way and understand where the strengths are, and perhaps use that more effectively?
Mm. Completely, and to sort of have conversations about who in this organization is kind of intellectually curious. Is this sort of just asks these kinds of questions naturally, because a lot of
Mm,
people do this stuff naturally. Who are these people? Because they might be our future managers. We thought they were the people who had deep technical expertise, and maybe they still will be the great managers. But just to have a language around talking about this kind of idea of breadth, curiosity, people who go and ask people like, what are the things I'm missing here
mm,
in your area? Trying to build interaction expertise in areas all the time, and you know, and and kind of have them on a list of people that to look out for the future, even if they're struggling a bit in their narrow area. Most people who are juniors start in a narrow area,
yes.
and they may not, they may, but they may be constantly being distracted by other things. Oh gosh, they're interested in all these other things. We just want them to do their job. Well, they may be some qualities that actually will really work for them later down the line, because
Mm.
they'll they're interested in other people's business, and in the right way, that can be really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really interesting. It's really striking a chord with me, everything that you're saying, Ed. Many years ago, actually, it's reminded me, many years ago, I worked on a program of work for the National Trust, and it was to try and engage their employees better and encourage creativity and sharing of ideas. What they had found way back was that there was no shortage of innovation and no shortage of ideas, but the problem was often, how do you pick up with an idea and run with it, and how do you, within an organisation which was very heavily dependent upon volunteers who were there for perhaps a short period of time, how do you actually get things to land for the longer term? So there was this worry that they were forever reinventing the wheel. An idea would be had and it would spark, and then it would fizzle because there was no way of capturing that idea and broadening it out across the country.
Hmm.
And we did a whole raft of things to help with that. But one of the things that we did was to actually encourage people to share what their passions were outside of work. what
Hmm.
what inspires you, what excites you, what do you love to do outside of your day job? And
Great.
whether and whatever it was, we had a forum for people to share that. And it was really, it reminds me what you're talking
Yeah,
about,
got
reminded me about. I'd forgotten about it, such a while ago.
it.
But people would then apply that skill that they brought to the local Amdram, with costume production, to restoring something in a castle. I'm making that up a little bit, but do you
Yeah,
understand
yeah.
what I mean?
No, I love it. I think it's fantastic, and I think it's just really important for people to talk about themselves beyond work, and people to see people as three-dimensional characters. I think that sounds
Yeah,
obvious, but yeah, no,
yeah.
that sounds like a really lovely exercise.
Lovely, because we all are, aren't we? And we you talk about dragonfly eyes, but we are all multifaceted people to
Mm,
a greater or lesser extent.
of course,
And
absolutely.
so many of those facets just don't get leveraged, basically,
No, 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 no,
is what
agreed.
you're talking about. We've run right out of time. That's fascinating. I thought it would be, and I'm really glad that it's lived up to my expectations. So thank you, Ed. So Ed Fidoe, founder of LIS, thank you very much for joining us today and helping us understand the difference between networked expertise and narrow expertise, and the value of interactional expertise. It's been great to hear from you. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to our listeners for listening to Engage for Success Radio. Don't forget, you can download or stream any of the great shows from our archive at any time. Just visit engageforsuccess.org. And that's where you can also sign up for our weekly newsletter and also get involved in the movement if you would like to be one of our volunteers, and we are entirely dependent upon volunteers at Engage for Success. So thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.
Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.